Hey, thanks, Kathleen. We hope you can hear us.
Got me.
Okay.
Oh, there's Lee. Oh, good. She can hear us. Oh, good. I'm so relieved now. All right. Yeah, so if along the way, if you have any questions or comments for Dave, our guest, who I'm about to introduce, go ahead and just type them in the chat. I think at some point in the conversation, we'll open all the mics up and unmute ourselves and hopefully have a discussion about the movie. But for right now, I'd like to introduce you to Dave Toplikar. He is currently with the KU Marketing Communications Office, but he is formerly with the Lawrence Journal World. And yes, I continue to tap into the pool of former Journal World journalists who happen to be specialists in certain areas, and this one was quite fitting. Dave, I don't know, Dave, how long did you work for the Journal World before you went to Vegas?
I worked for the Journal World from about 1978 to about 2007.
Oh yeah, wow, okay.
So a long time, almost 30 years.
Long time. And then in 2007, he went to the Las Vegas Sun and was the manager of the multimedia operation there, online news. And while there, he had an interesting assignment that took him to, well, I think at this point, Dave, I'm just going to let you tell that story, because it was sparking along the way this interest in UFOs and fielding phone calls from people who had seen something that they felt sort of compelled to report. And but then there was something that happened in Nevada that sort of lit the fire. And why don't you take up the story from there, if you would?
Yeah, I've been fielding phone calls from people occasionally who had seen UFOs, calling in and say, I don't want to give my name, but I just saw two helicopters escorting what looked like a flying disc going by. And, and so I'd ask for a number, and of course they wouldn't give me one. So anyway, I thought I'd call Nellis Air Force Base, which was the Air Force Base north of town. Couldn't get much out of them. So I decided, well, I'll do a story, start doing some stories out of Nellis. So I went out there one time and went through the security, went into the building. I was assigned an escort. They took me into a little conference room. As I was waiting for the guy I was going to be talking to, I looked up on the wall and there was this topographical map of Nevada, which had a big sign on it that said something like Air Force Testing Range. And I just walked up to it and was looking on it, killing some time. And I just said to the guy, is this where Area 51 is? He didn't answer. I looked over at him and he had turned pale. And I felt like I had just made a big mistake and I didn't know what was going to happen. But then he recovered and he said, well, I can't talk about that. I can give you some information on that. And then he left the room, and the guy I was supposed to talk to came in, and he was kind of a shadowy guy. And we talked about his program, which was about cybersecurity and cyber warfare. But anyway, the whole notion of why is the Air Force so freaked out about talking about Area 51? I mean, this is in 2012. This is after all the movies had come out, like Independence Days and Men in Black and all the things like that. So I was just kind of shocked that and so it kind of piqued my interest, and I eventually came back to Lawrence and was reading USA Today one day, and I noticed that they had taken all the Project Blue Book documents. There were 130,000 of them. And a place called the Black Vault, which is a website, online website. They had digitized all of these documents, which before had just been paper documents, and then now they were available online, and you could actually search through them by date and by place. So I got on there and I did a search and I found some things that had happened in Kansas that I had never heard of before. So yada, yada, yada. I ended up writing a book about it.
Right, and I'm gonna let you pick up with the names of the books in just a minute. Kathleen has reminded me that I completely forgot to ask about desserts. And I was kind of looking forward to these desserts to see if anybody brought any and if they were on theme. And so if you have any desserts, this is what we normally do. We share what we're enjoying. Anybody have a dessert tonight that they'd like to talk about? Okay, Mary, go.
Okay, we're eating Reese's peanut butter cups. Does anybody know why?
No.
E.T.
E.T., yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, that was his
First-
favorite.
First, we thought it was M&M's, but our son said, no, they put out Reese's peanut butter cups.
Okay, good to know. All right, anybody else? Albans, are you having a dessert tonight?
We are. Maureen came up with the idea of pie in the sky. So we have a pie. So I threw a couple recipes together to try something that's kind of experimental. So it's basically a peach Zabioni pie, and it's just a pie, but the pie in the sky idea with Maureen's I thought was pretty good.
Okay, thanks. Carola, did you make one?
Well, I made Jack's that recipe, those cookies. And but I didn't have salted caramel chips and I didn't have pecans, so I had to change the recipe a little bit. And I made it gluten-free because that's what my daughter likes. So they're still good. They're still very good with all the changes.
All right, awesome. Angie's showing us something up close.
Yes, mine has no UFO connection, but it's really good. I got it from Maselli's yesterday. It's almond cake.
Nice.
Quite yummy.
Okay. Okay, anybody else? Well, I wanted to get that in. Lest I forgot. Okay. All right, back to your books, Dave. So was the first book UFO Cold Cases, Kansas?
Yes. And here it is.
Show it to us, sure, of course.
My shameless plug.
And so this was based on the Project Blue Book documents that you found?
I'd gotten online on this website and just started digging through it. These documents were in the form of old letters back and forth to people. They were like police reports that were filled out where police had written down things that people had told them. They were scraps of paper that had things like sketches on them, and they had some really pretty blurry black and white photos on there. They didn't reproduce that well, but the accumulation of so much stuff that had never been solved just really intrigued me and made me kind of wonder. The government spent an awful lot of time looking into this. They were very serious about it. So, what's going on back then? So it got me interested in. So my first book, I just decided to pick 10 cases in Kansas that were labeled as unknowns. They were all between about 1947 and 1969 when Project Blue Book ended. I looked through those and put them together in the first book. Then after that book was sort of kind of, about a week after I actually had it published on Amazon, the Kansas MUFON group, which meets over at Wayne and Larry's monthly, they called me up and wanted me to come speak. So I went in and I realized there's so many people in Kansas that are interested in this subject. And I was just so surprised. So I started doing a lot more research and started reading any book I could get a hold of. And I came across in the library, Mirage Men, which the movie was based on. So that was kind of funny when Kathy asked me if I had seen the movie. I hadn't seen the movie, but I'd read the book.
So what was your take? I mean, the book deals with global, these into situations or cases that were happening over in Europe and around the world. The movie, as I understand it, takes a focus specifically on the United States, and in particular this one case, or this one series of cases.
Basically, I think what the book gets at is there was a guy by the name of Richard Doty who was, I guess, an operative of the CIA. He was assigned to provide disinformation to this guy out in Nevada, Paul Benowitz, a very smart, rich guy in Nevada who, on his own, started investigating what he thought were strange goings on near his home in Albuquerque. He'd look over the mountains and see a lot of activity going on in this area called the Archuleta Mesa. You'd see lights and he'd see just crazy things that you wouldn't normally expect. And then I guess he also started hearing radio transmissions coming out of there too. Well, rather than the government coming up to him and saying, we've got some secret things going on over there, we don't want you to be involved, they created this entire program of disinformation and had him convinced that there was something going on. And he would go on his missions, and he had a private plane, and he would fly around and make reports about what was going on. And they sent Richard Doty to go camping up there with him. And it was just horrendous when you think about the amount of trouble that they went to practically drive Paul Benowitz crazy, because one, either he was getting too close to the truth, or, why didn't they just tell him, we really don't want you to investigate this at all. They apparently did a lot of crazy things, like they had special helicopters that were built that looked like UFOs, that had strange strobe lights on them, and they were painted black, and they looked like UFOs taking off and on. But anyway, the whole thing, the takeaway I got from the whole thing was the CIA, for whatever reason, had decided to begin using UFOs as a cover story for some of its stealth projects, like the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird, and some of those programs that they were creating out in the high desert over there by Holloman Air Force Base in central Nevada, by the White Sands area where they had the first atomic blasts. But yeah, it was very strange. Like, why is the CIA using UFOs as a cover story? What is really going on?
Yeah, and that was like the main question in my mind. It was, I thought he had sophisticated surveillance equipment. I mean, he was a wealthy individual and had specific, particularly sophisticated audio equipment. I thought I saw. And do you think that was the reason, that they thought he was just technically a threat?
Well, it doesn't make any sense when you look at it. You kind of wonder if they were just using him as an example of how you could thwart or get people to believe something. And I don't know, it's still kind of a mystery. But even Richard Doty confessed that he actually went up to Paul Benowitz and said to him at one point in time, hey, I want to tell you right now that what we were doing to you. And Paul was so far gone that he didn't even believe that.
Yeah.
He thought there was still a lot of craziness going on.
Yeah. I want to backtrack because we've got a question back to the Project Blue Book. Can you explain more about that and the origin of Project Blue Book as you understand it?
Yes. Back in the 1940s, there were a lot of things that were being seen after the war. There were a lot of pilots who saw things during the war They call them Foo Fighters. And they were little beams of light that they would see on the wingtips, and they weren't exactly sure what they were. They thought they might have been some kind of German weapon, but a lot of these sightings continued to happen, and they were compiled into what the Air Force called at the time informally Project Saucer. People would see strange things. Eventually, there was an Air Force pilot who was chasing one of these things, and he actually crash landed. So that the Air Force, because that was kind of a public thing, they began a coded project, which they called Project Sign. And that lasted a couple of years, and then it became Project Grudge. And then in 1952, there were a lot of sightings over Washington, D.C. There were two airports where there were radar operators who had seen 14 different blips on their oscilloscopes. And it lasted over 2 weekends. And whenever they would bring in Air Force planes to kind of check out what are these blips that we're seeing over Washington, D.C., like even over the White House on radar, and then they would send the planes through there, and the planes, as soon as the planes got through there, the blips would disappear on the radar scopes. As soon as the planes left, the blips would come back. And they were solid blips, and these well-trained operators just couldn't make head or tail what was going on. So, there was a big clamor, and it was like the biggest press conference after the war that there had ever been. They had General Ramey was out talking to the press, and then that spawned Project Blue Book, which they set up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And from 1952 to 1969, they began investigating and cataloging all of the UFO sightings that came in from the United States and some from elsewhere. And in their files, they have like 12,600 and I think 18 different cases that they had gone over. And among those, there were 701 that were unsolved when they finally closed the books on Project Blue Book in 1969, early 1970. That's like 701 cases that were totally unsolved. And those are the ones that I started looking at when they became available online. And you have to ask yourself, why did the government just kind of let those things go?
Yeah, so solved would mean explained, right?
What they did is they had investigators that whenever they got something that was pretty crazy that people had seen in the sky, and they realized it wasn't a bird, or it wasn't a balloon, or it wasn't a star or planet or something, they would set a team of investigators to kind of see what else they could find. And they on their payroll, they brought in a guy from Northwestern University. He was in charge of the astronomy department there. His name was J. Allen Hynek. And Hynek was supposed to be the outside scientific consultant, and he would go over the cases and try to surmise what it was that they were seeing. Anyway, these cases went on for close to 20 years before the Air Force got tired of being involved in the UFO business and got out of it. But after they got out of it, it wasn't as if the UFOs stopped happening. I mean, what happened is the people in the press, the people in government, everybody started treating UFOs like the paranormal things, like leprechauns, mythology, whatever. We started all laughing about little green men and things like that. But at the same time, people were still looking out their window and seeing crazy things happening in the sky and not being able to explain it. So we believe that the government had continued to investigate, only they had been doing it privately so they wouldn't come under the scrutiny of the press. Then kind of the lid got blown off of it in around 2017 when the New York Times came out with a story that showed that there was a government program called AATIP, AATIP, the Advanced Aeronautics, I forget, technological, I forget what the acronym stood for, but they, under kind of a black project in the Defense Department, had allocated about $20 million over a period of between 2005 and 2012. And they had been investigating it, all these different pieces of UFOs that they had collected. And I guess we found out about it through a guy who was in charge of the program who quit. He kind of got out of it. His name was Louis Alessandro. And he joined another organization, and he's been kind of going public, and they've been trying to come up with findings. But when Louis Alessandro quit, he brought with him 4 different pieces of video that you may have seen shown on TV recently, of these little tic-tac shaped objects that were seen by our military flying over the ocean at crazy speeds that our pilots couldn't even keep up with, and darting back and forth. And they'd be 50 feet over the water in 1 second, and another second they'd be up 5,000 feet in the air. They didn't have any visible means of wings or any kind of propulsion system, so they don't know what was causing them to do that. But so the government is admitted that, yeah, there are some crazy things out there that we can't figure out. But at the same time, we know that the CIA, by the stories in the Mirage Men book and the movie, and Richard Doty, had been assigned to kind of like cover up a lot of things. So we're not too sure what these things are, if they are government related, and part of the government knows about it and part of it doesn't know about it, or actually what's going on.
Yeah, and you said to me in an email that Richard Doty, I mean, I wasn't sure at the end of the movie how much he knew. I mean, if you could even distinguish real from unreal. And you said he had knowledge of some real activity, but was really, his job was to disinform, and to great lengths. I mean, to extraordinarily elaborate lengths. That's what blew my mind about the whole movie, that they had a staff with the time to create this illusion or these documents and these images and doctor them and all that. But that Doty was he, does that mean that he was maybe not even sure at the end?
Well, I think at the end, they kind of wanted to leave it as if we weren't too sure what was going on one way or the other, because there had been all these people that Doty had kind of poisoned, like the guy who broke the story on the Roswell findings. I think his name was Bill Moore, and Bill Moore had been kind of made a pact with the devil, Faustian pact with Richard Doty, that if you tell your people this, I will give you some genuine information, and you'll be the first to know about this. So Bill Moore kind of went along with him. And then I guess he realized that he had gone in too far, and he had, was also responsible for what had happened to Paul Benowitz.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in? Go ahead and just unmute yourself and do so. Did you want to say something, Dave? Oh, sorry.
I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, it's okay. No, I wanted to read you something. I found a It's on Reddit, and it is a conversation between Mark Pilkington, Roland Denning, Kripos Krepianu, and John Limberg, who were the creators of the movie. And they took questions from the Reddit community. And it was fascinating. And I just found it today. I should have shared it with you, but they were talking about, let me find the piece here. Oh yeah. The question was, if Richard Doty is a Mirage man, then I assume that there must be many more out there charged with warping the truth and pushing secret agendas or disinformation. Do you know or have any inclination or suspicion as to who other Mirage men might be? Are there specific things to watch out for, like access to top secret document papers without disclosure of the source, for example? And the answer was absolutely, there are other Mirage men out there, but I would say that everyone who is spreading unverified rumors in the UFO field, whoever they work for, whichever aspect of the field they represent, is also a Mirage man. Many of them don't even realize that they're doing the Mirage men's work for them, keeping the tent poles of the UFO arena propped up with their tails. I thought that was fascinating. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. You know, there was a guy by the name of Bob Lazar who came forward in 1989 and had this crazy great tale about working at Area 51 in this area called Section 4 of Area 51. He said he'd go out there every day. They'd take him out on buses and they'd take him to out to this Papoose Range mountain. And there would be these doors that were built disguised into the mountain, and they'd open up, and inside were, I guess, about a dozen of some working, some non-working UFOs that the government had been collecting since 1947. And Bob said they brought him in to kind of see what he could do, because they had kind of exhausted all their efforts at trying to figure out how to back engineer these things. He said they had one working model. He called it the sport model. And I guess they took it out and they flew it around, but they didn't really know how it worked. They had some ideas. They said that it ran off of element 115. Then Bob was kind of dismissed by a lot of the people in the UFO field as making it all up, but he always insisted, even 25 years later, that everything is true. And some of the things that he actually said have been proven. In fact, the element 115 was actually developed in a lab recently. It was kind of a theoretical element at the time he mentioned it, but they've actually been able to develop it. So there was some truth to a lot of what he said, but we still don't know exactly whether the government has a place where it has a dozen crashed, you know, crashed craft and sitting in. So I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Mary.
Dave, I grew up in a small town about 10 miles from Delphus, Kansas, and I'd like you to speak to that incident that happened, I believe, in 1971. I happened to be out there at that time, right after it happened, and I remember them bringing in I don't remember the man's name, a scientist over at the community college who spoke about it. I remember my brothers going down and looking.
The only problem with that is that happened after Project Blue Book.
Yeah.
And I don't have the information that you might need on it. And I don't really know that much about that particular project. I didn't research it or anything.
Okay. I was just curious what happened to the boy.
But
Mary, can you tell us the story? I'm really curious. What exactly happened?
Well, my memory's not the best. I think he was on his farm. He was taking care of his sheep. He heard something around behind the barn, and there was this huge circular craft hovering above the ground. I had heard that it blinded him and it blinded his dog. I don't know if he's still blind or not. I know that as I was looking up online, there was still some work being done on analysis of the soil and what had happened to that area. It was burned out in a big circle. I don't have a lot of specifics on it, except that, I mean, it was just on a farm there and this kid, and it was big enough that some UFOs expert did come in and speak about it.
Where was that at?
Delphus, Kansas,
Oh,
which
yeah,
is,
I saw that when I was
Yeah.
working up there. Yeah. On the east side of town, northeast side of town, there's a big area, a pretty
Yes.
big area where nothing will grow.
right. And I believe there's a man in England who's done lots of analysis on it and on the soil. I don't know whatever has come of it. I'm just curious.
I guess that's kind of, that particular incident kind of shows me that there's so many incidents like that out there that the government is apparently says it's no longer investigating. And you kind of wonder, are they really investigating it, or did they investigate it? And did they just kind of tuck away their findings somewhere in a deep black vault somewhere?
So the cattle mutilations in this movie, as I understood, perhaps were a result of testing to see if the radiation got into the environment and the animals as a result of that dumb idea of exploding a nuclear bomb to get gas out of the ground like fracking. So if
Well,
that was,
I think that's what the CIA apparently wants you
Okay.
to believe.
because there were those that happened in Kansas too.
Yeah, and there was a reporter in there. I don't know if you remember her. She was wearing a green hat.
Yes.
Her name is Linda Moulton Howe. Anyway, she's made a kind of a career of investigating cattle mutilations, and she was a TV reporter, very respected in California. And she started looking into the cattle mutilations and getting involved in the UFO, kind of going down that little rabbit hole that we all kind of go into. And then you have to worry about what's real and what's not real. And I think they tried to trick her with some false information.
Okay.
And so she's kind of gun shy about talking about certain things. And I noticed in that movie that there was a point in the movie where she was very adamant about wanting to say that I'm not going to say that it was all UFOs or CIA cover up, because that's not the truth. In fact, the opposite is true. So, and she's been looking at it for 20 some years.
Well,
Yeah, that was quite a scene. That was quite at the end. I mean, towards the end, when she, was getting all this evidence that she had been duped, but then, and remained a believer. And is she still with us and working?
Yeah, she's still out there investigating. In fact, when I spoke to the local MUFON group, the Kansas MUFON group, they were telling me that they often get together with Linda Moulton Howe at a UFO convention in Arkansas once a year, and they like to talk to her about cattle mutilations and what she'd found out, and they would share information. So she's pretty well known, I guess, in UFO circles. She's sort of a rock star.
Have you been to a UFO convention, Dave?
I went down to Roswell twice. Once on the 4th of July. My son lives in Albuquerque, so we were visiting him and decided to just drive down to Roswell. We heard there was a parade and a festival down there, so we got down there, and there were a lot of people who were there who were serious UFO researchers. There were some speakers, people that had written some books on Roswell and Area 51 and some of the other Hangar 18 and some of those things. And then there were the people that were just there for the fun of it, wearing the tinfoil hats and dressing up as aliens and just having a great old time, having a parade. The city of Roswell, pretty much their Chamber of Commerce has realized that that's their big tourist attraction. So they're perpetuating the whole thing as much as they can. I was also, I've spoken to the Kansas MUFON group, but I also spoke to the Missouri MUFON group a couple of years ago, and they were really an interesting group of people. They had everybody from, well, there was a man who was there, and after I spoke, he got up and made an announcement that I had solved a mystery for him, that on chapter 2 of my Missouri book, I explained about the Green Orb over Kansas City, that he realized it was the same one that had taken him up as a kid and took him to a planet. And he went on and on about seeing what he had done on his trip. And I thought, well, you have lots of people like that out there.
Wait, so the Green Orb over Kansas City. I grew up in Kansas City. Some of us here did. What was that story?
I can't remember the year exactly, but there was a man and his wife. I believe that he was with the Air Force, and they had just bought a house out in Kansas City, and they were looking outside in their back window, and they saw something. It was a green something. So they tracked it, and the man worked for the Air Force, and so he called the local airport, and they didn't know, they had seen it too. And I guess the next day he sent a report to the Project Blue Book people, and they wrote up what he'd seen. They of course had no explanation. It was one of those the great unknowns that I had put in my book. And this guy in Kansas City said that he was 4 years old when he was taken away, encouraged to come across a ship by a dog-faced alien, and taken up in a spaceship and flown to someplace where he played with other children for a while. Then they brought him back, and he said he was a teacher. He taught science.
Yeah. Well, I have a follow-up question about the cow mutilations from Kay. What was the cause, or what's the said cause of the cow mutilations?
Well, I think the biologists who have looked into it, the veterinarians, the sheriff's officers, are all kind of dumbfounded. They don't know why cattle would be found in a field with no blood around. Totally looks like the cow died peacefully with maybe half of its face gone, part of its tongue taken out. Sometimes the udders were taken out. Sometimes the sexual organs were missing. They don't know what was going on. So I guess the explanation that the CIA people said, which was they were trying to decide whether any of the cattle were suffering from any radioactive repercussions from atomic blasts from, I guess, what we would call today fracking.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I hope this isn't a joke, Scott Morgan. Scott says, ask Kathleen about falling asleep and driving off the extraterrestrial highway, Nevada State Road 375, with the entire family. It passes Area 51. Much calamity, but sadly, no aliens. Kathleen?
All true.
That's it?
It's a really monotonous road. I mean, it's like somebody pulled a screen down in the distance, and there's no like real shoulder. You just go off into the dust. And we had lunch along the extraterrestrial highway, and I kid you not, you pull off into the rest stop and there is not a sound. I mean, it is dead quiet, and it's in the middle of the day. There's no animals, there's no bugs, there's no cars. And so we sat in dead silence, had really dry peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, because that's what the Morgans eat on their road trips along the side of the road. And then I got on, and you have that post lunch fatigue. And I kind of dozed off and off I went off the highway, but there was nobody around to hurt anything. So yeah, it's true. We actually have a family photo under the sign that says, welcome to the extraterrestrial highway.
And what year was that? What year?
When was that?
2003.
2003.
Okay, and Dave, what year did Project Blue Book end?
About 1969, 70.
Okay.
Okay. So well before high-res photography, everybody having a cell phone and camera, you know, all the sophisticated equipment that we all have now. Maureen Altman sent me a link to a video that Neil deGrasse Tyson made with in kind of a discussion about how eyewitnesses really are sort of the least reliable in terms of evidence, and that now we have all this technology and it's in everybody's hands, and why aren't there more pictures? Why aren't there more videos? Why aren't there more sounds and all of that? And isn't it interesting that the government's decided they're not into that business anymore, you know? I just thought that was an interesting take.
Well, they say they're not into it, but you know, recent developments have shown that they really do. They do have a strong interest in it, and they are watching the skies and they are finding things. It's just that they aren't talking about it.
Any idea though, why we don't see more on social media? I mean, maybe it's in the people that you follow, I don't know, and they're not in my circle, but you know, it seems to me we would be seeing more images or, you know, proof, if you will, of, or at least, you know, photographs or.
I think photographs are so easy to fake these days that photographs aren't really considered proof these days. So I think we want the smoking gun. We want we want somebody to show up on the 5:30 p.m. news and say, yes, I am from
Right.
planet whatever.
Yeah.
Of course, they'd never make it on because everybody would think they were a kook.
So
It's sort of the catch-22.
right, exactly. So Larry's saying the aliens did it. Larry says 2 issues here as I see it. Are there aliens? And government ethics. The ethics of what Richard Doty did seem to trump everything.
I think, yeah, the ethics of Richard Doty kind of totally muddies the waters.
Right.
You can't trust anything. You know, you're afraid to believe anything. It's sort of like, how do you check out what, you know, a grainy photo that shows a UFO or a little green man, or a woman by that matter.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't make anybody's case. What happened to him? Do you know? No, I don't either. I should have. So you said you went into this, I mean, back when you were working here and taking phone calls once in a while from people who reported various sightings, and you were a skeptic, and you called yourself a skeptic, and all reporters, frankly, should be skeptics.
Well, yeah, as a profession, you know, you're told if your mother tells you that she loves you, check it out.
But now, what's your
now I'm kind of, you know, I talk to people at these gatherings, and they are, you know, a lot of them are stone cold sober people that will, you know, they saw something and they want somebody to tell them what it was. And they're angry when they find out that nobody's looking into it. And, you know, because they feel like they're going out on a limb if they give their story, and they don't want to be ridiculed or lose their position in society or whatever. There was a story that I have in my Missouri book about a guy who had a little ranch north of Kansas City, and he had a few cattle, maybe about 20 head. Just they were out in the pen one night, and he woke up about 4 a.m. or so, and heard him making a lot of noise. So he went to the picture window and looked out, and he saw this big, 100-foot object hovering above his cattle, and they were all looking up at it. And then suddenly, and then when he saw it, he thought, that's what's been taking my cattle. And then all of a sudden the cattle just, one of them got spooked, and they all ran to the barn. And then he saw the big object just kind of slowly meander away. And he said it made a sound, and the sound it made was sort of like a wire that you would spin above your head. You could kind of, that's how he described it, like a whooshing sound, right? Well, he reported that, and he didn't want to give his name because he had just come from, I guess, county commission meeting where he was one of the county commissioners or whatever. I can't remember exactly what he was, but he had some position of authority over there. But they went out and they sent J. Allen Hynek out to check it out, and he couldn't figure out what it was. And then I think they had asked around the different airports if they had seen anything that night, and they thought maybe it was a helicopter, and none of the helicopters that anybody had were out in that vicinity at that particular time, so they didn't think it was a helicopter. But what was kind of crazy is a woman saw the report in the Kansas City Star about it, and she called in and said that she and her daughter had also heard that strange whipping noise one night, about the same night. They didn't see anything, but they heard the sound. So,
Jill, would you unmute yourself? Jill is recommending a book called Abducted by Susan A. Clancy. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, back it off a little bit. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Abducted. It's actually one of my favorite books that I read a few years ago. And it talks about people who are perfectly reasonable souls. And, they have a lot of believability. And some of them are professionals, some of them are farmers, and they've had various experiences about being abducted by aliens. But what's interesting is that the stories are remarkably similar to each other. The aliens all sort of fit a certain appearance parameter, and there could be a reason for this. One is there really are aliens and they actually look like that, or the stories tend to feed off of one another and people reuse the same sort of themes, and it makes sense somewhere back in their psychology. They don't realize they're using someone else's, but it fits the feeling that they've had. I think it's an excellent book. I just really like this, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
So, Jill,
Yes.
does the book support the people as factual, or does it?
Well, this
leave
is
it
a
up to you?
psychologist. Okay, so she explains how you can completely know that you've been abducted, but I'm afraid she takes this a scientific approach. And, I don't think she says absolutely you haven't been abducted, but that's the implication.
Her specialty is false memories.
Okay,
Jill,
so she's questioning their.
Yeah, she has a elaborate explanation, which I found quite believable, as to how the mind produces these feelings and thoughts. And in fact, they have the experience mentally of being abducted without actually being abducted.
Jill, does she ever mention the Salem witch trial and the concept of group hysteria and indoctrination? it
don't
just
think
seems,
so. You remember that?
I don't.
when
I
we
don't
were
remember them.
kids of my generation, there was a mythology that grew up. They were always discs or they were always saucers. And, you know, even the aliens look different because they always had the enlarged heads. So we would believe
head.
they're more intelligent than we. There were, you know, stereotypes of right up until Richard Dreyfuss was going to be beamed up. There was a mythology that was so uniform that it's hard to say it was the aliens rather than Hollywood and disinformation and the psychosis we all had about atomic warfare. You know, I would think that they would spend a great deal more time worrying about ransomware and the obviously incredible technology that both Russia and China and other people who may not be friendly to us are doing right now. And it is not out of the construct of what we're talking about to say that a lot of this can be interference, but not necessarily, you know, from outer space. And if Dodi and that story is to believe, they murdered a man. They drove him crazy. It is one of the most tragic things, and that's not the only person they probably did. And if that kind of inhumane and absolutely manipulative, and I believe John le Carré and the others, if that can happen, this is not outside our imagination. You don't need people from outer space to have these phenomena or to have this kind of cruelty or probing.
Well, it's kind of the concept of group think. If you think of 1984 and some of those books.
It comes from the
and
same,
it
same
seemed like they were right when they were saying maybe the CIA was experimenting to see how could they actually deceive people. And, you know, sort of drive them in a direction, which is a little scary, but you just think of all the ways in which we have fake news and everything today.
Right, it's running agents and counterintelligence, and it can be all of one material fabric in a way.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to know that because we're all baby boomers, I think, or close, and it's
We're older.
Or well,
we're over.
Well, but you know, the earliest, I mean, in terms of just aliens sort of coming into, you know, the zeitgeist or the just mainstream culture, the earliest I can remember is My Favorite Martian. And I think I was probably 8 or 9 or 7, I'm not sure. In fact, my friend and writing partner for a little while's father was the head writer on My Favorite Martian. They came up with that guy, and he was in human form, and you know, and then the alien image got bigger, you know, bigger heads, like you say, and
Flash Gordon,
but always kind of human looking too. You know, it was
right. Flash Gordon went for even an older generation than I. It's an old story.
Yeah.
Primal fear.
So I guess, and this comes from Larry, but I think it's a wonderful final question, Dave, with all the stories you've read and the cases you've read, the cold cases and solved cases you've read, and the people you've talked to and the stories you've heard, eyewitnesses. Do you believe in aliens?
I'm gonna go all Neil deGrasse Tyson on you and just say, I know that the universe is too big to rule anything out. So yes, I do believe that there could be something out there. Whether they've been here or not, I don't know. Maybe what people are seeing is some ancient civilization that keeps themselves hidden from us. It's you know, that are underground under Antarctica where we can't find them, and they just kind of keep watch over us, make sure that we don't spoil the planet too badly.
Well, they're going to be exposed because we are screwing it with global warming, and they're going to be exposed if they're under the Antarctic.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating topic, and I'm so glad you could join us tonight, Dave. And again, the books are UFO Cold Cases Kansas and UFO Cold Cases Missouri. And where can you can get them on Amazon anywhere locally? Can we get them from you?
Probably the best bet is to order them from Amazon, and they'll usually show up at your front door.
So thank you. I think I got through. Oh yes, now I'm being age checked here. Outer Limits, yes. Buck Rogers, that was before, certainly before My Favorite Martian. There was a 1930s radio show about aliens invading the Earth. Oh yeah, that was that famous
World of Worlds.
Yeah. Outer Limits,
Wells,
Lost in Space, and the Jetsons from The Youngster.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and all the
There you
Wells stories.
Right.
Well,
Right.
I unmuted everyone if we want to give Dave a round of applause.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Dave, so good
Thank
to see
you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me, and I hope you enjoyed your desserts, and don't forget to tip your waiters and waitresses on the way out.
There you go. There you go. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thanks.